Welcome to my channel Sleep Audio Stories. Thank you for watching. Video, subscribe, and like my channel.
Dr. Trafalgus by Jules Verne. 1. Swish, it is the wind let loose. Swash, it is the rain falling in torrents. This shrieking squall bends down the trees of the Volsinian coast and hurries on, flinging itself against the sides of the mountains of Crimea. Along the whole length of the littoral are high rocks, gnawed by the billows of the vast sea of Megalocrida. Swish, swash. Down by the harbor nestles the little town of Lovecraft, perhaps 100 houses, with green palings which defend them indifferently from the wild wind. 4 or 5 hilly streets, ravines rather than streets, paved with pebbles and strewn with ashes thrown from the active cones in the background. The volcano is not far distant. It is called the folklore. During the day it sends forth sulphurous vapors. At night, from time to time, great outpourings of flame. Like a lighthouse carrying 150 Kurtzes, the folklore indicates the port of Lovecraft to the coasters, Felsens, Verlichs, and Balanzes, whose keels furrow the waters of Megalocrida. On the other side of the town are ruins dating from the Crimarian era. Then a suburb, Arab in appearance, much like a kasbah, with white walls, domed roofs, and sun-scorched terraces, which are all nothing but accumulations of square stones thrown together at random. Veritable dice are these, whose numbers will never be effaced by the rust of time. Among others we notice the 6-4, a name given to a curious erection, having 6 openings on one side and 4 on the other. A belfry overlooks the town, the square belfry of Saint Philphilina, with bells hung in the thickness of the walls, which sometimes a hurricane will set in motion. That is a bad sign. The people tremble when they hear it. Such is Lovecraft. Then come the scattered habitations in the country, set amid heath and broom as in Brittany. But this is not Brittany. Is it in France? I do not know. Is it in Europe? I cannot tell. At all events, do not look for Lovecraft on any map. 2. Rat-tat! A discreet knock is struck upon the narrow door of 6-4 at the left corner of the Rue Massagliere. This is one of the most comfortable houses in Lovecraft, if such a word is known there. One of the richest, if gaining some millions of fretzers by hook or by crook constitutes riches. The rat-tat is answered by a savage bark in which is much of a lupin howl, as if a wolf should bark. Then a window is opened above the door of 6-4, and an ill-tempered voice says, "Deuce take people who come bothering here." A young girl, shivering in the rain, wrapped in a thin cloak, asks if Dr. Trafalgus is at home. He is, or he is not, according to circumstances. I want him to come to my father, who is dying. Where is he dying? At Valcarnian, 4 Kurtzes from here. And his name? Vort Cartif. Vort Cartif, the herring salter? Yes, and if Dr. Trafalgus... Dr. Trafalgus is not at home! And the window is closed with a slam, while the swishes of the wind and the swashes of the rain mingle in a deafening uproar. 3. A hard man, this Dr. Trafalgus, with little compassion, and attending no one unless paid cash in advance. His old Hersoff, a mongrel of bulldog and spaniel, would have had more feeling than he. The house called 6-4 admitted no poor, and opened only to the rich. Further, it had a regular tariff, so much for a typhoid fever, so much for a fit, so much for a pericarditis, and for other complaints which doctors invent by the dozen. Now, Vort Cartif, the herring salter, was a poor man, and of low degree. Why should Dr. Trafalgus have taken any trouble, and on such a night? Is it nothing that I should have had to get up? He murmured as he went back to bed. That alone is worth 10 fretzers. Hardly 20 minutes had passed when the iron hammer was again struck on the door of 6-4. Much against his inclination, the doctor left his bed and leaned out of his window. "Who is there?" he cried. "I am the wife of Vort Cartif." "The herring salter of Valcarnian?" "Yes, and if you refuse to come, he will die." "All right, you will be a widow." "Here are 20 fretzers." 20 fretzers for going to Valcarnian, 4 Kurtzes from here. Thank you, be off with you. And the window was closed again. 20 fretzers, a grand fee. Risk a cold or lumbago for 20 fretzers. especially when tomorrow one has to go to Kiltrino to visit the rich Edzingov, laid up with gout which is valued at 50 fretzers the visit. With this agreeable prospect before him, Dr. Trafalgar slept more soundly than before. Swish, swash, and then rat-tat, rat-tat, rat-tat. To the noises of the squall were now added 3 blows upon the knocker, struck by a more decided hand. The doctor slept. He woke but in a fearful humor. When he opened the window, the storm came in like a charge of shot. "I am come about the herring salter." "That wretched herring salter again!" "I am his mother." "May his mother, his wife, and his daughter perish with him." "He has had an attack." "Let him defend himself." "Some money has been paid us," continued the old woman. "An installment on the house sold to the Commandeur Dutrop of the Rue Massagliere. If you do not come, my granddaughter will no longer have a father, my daughter-in-law a husband, myself a son." It was piteous and terrible to hear the old woman's voice, to know that the wind was freezing the blood in her veins, that the rain was soaking her very bones beneath her thin flesh. "A fit? Why, that would be 200 fritzers," replied the heartless Trafalgar. "We have only 120. "Good night," and the window was again closed. But after due reflection, it appeared that 120 fretzers for an hour and a half on the road, plus half an hour of visit, made a fretzer a minute. A small profit, but still not to be despised. Instead of going to bed again, the doctor slipped into his coat of velveter, went down in his wading boots, stowed himself away in his great coat of lurtain, with his sourire on his head and his mufflers on his hands. He left his lamp lighted close to his pharmacopoeia, open at page 197. Then, pulling the door of 64, he paused on the threshold. The old woman was there, leaning on her stick, bowed down by her 80 years of misery. "The 120 fretzers." "Here is the money, and may God multiply it for you 100-fold. "God, whoever saw the color of his money." The doctor whistled for Herzog, gave him a small lantern to carry, and took the road towards the sea. The old woman followed. 5. What swishy, swashy weather! The bells of St. Philphilina are all swinging by reason of the gale. A bad sign, but Dr. Trafalgar is not superstitious. He believes in nothing, not even in his own science, except for what it brings him in. What weather, and also what a road! Pebbles and ashes. The pebbles slippery with seaweed, the ashes crackling with iron refuse. No other light than that of Herzog's lantern, vague and uncertain. At times, jets of flame from folklore uprear themselves, and in the midst of them appear great comical silhouettes. In truth, no one knows what is in the depths of those unfathomable craters. Perhaps spirits of the other world, which volatilize themselves as they come forth. The doctor and the old woman follow the curves of the little bays of the littoral. The sea is white with a livid whiteness, a morning white. It sparkles as it throws off the crests of the surf, which seem like outpourings of glowworms. These two persons go on thus as far as the turn in the road between sandhills, where the brooms and the reeds clash together with a shock like that of bayonets. The dog had drawn near to his master and seemed to say to him, "Come, come, 120 fretzers for the strong box. That is the way to make a fortune. Another rood added to the vineyard, another dish added to our supper, another meat pie for the faithful Herzog. Let us look after the rich invalids and look after them, according to their purses." At that spot the old woman pauses. With her trembling finger she points out among the shadows of a reddish light. There is the house of Vort Cartiff, the herring salter. "There?" said the doctor. "Yes," said the old woman. "Hurrah!" cries the dog Herzog. A sudden explosion from the folklore, shaken to its very base. A sheaf of lurid flame springs up to the zenith, forcing its way through the clouds. Dr. Trafalgar is hurled to the ground. He swears roundly, picks himself up, and looks about him. The old woman is no longer there. Has she disappeared through some fissure of the earth, or has she flown away on the wings of the mist? As for the dog, he is there still, standing on his hind legs, his jaws apart, his lantern extinguished. "Nevertheless, we will go on," mutters Dr. Trafalgar. The honest man has been paid his 120 fretzers, and he must earn them. 6. Only a luminous speck at the distance of half a kurtz. It is the lamp of the dying, perhaps of the dead. Of course, it is the herring salter's house. The old woman pointed to it with her finger. No mistake is possible. Through the whistling swishes and the dashing swashes, through the uproar of the tempest, Dr. Trafalgus tramps on with hurried steps. As he advances, the house becomes more distinct, being isolated in the midst of the landscape. It is very remarkable how much it resembles that of Dr. Trafalgus, the 6'4" of Lovecraft. The same arrangement of windows, the same little arched door. Dr. Trafalgus hastens on as fast as the gale allows him. The door is ajar. He has but to push it. He pushes it, he enters, and the wind roughly closes it behind him. The dog, Herzog, left outside, howls with intervals of silence. Strange. One would have said that Dr. Trafalgus had come back to his own house. And yet, he has not wandered. He has not even taken a turning. He is at Valcarnian, not at Lovecraft. And yet, here is the same low vaulted passage, the same wooden staircase with high barristers, worn away by the constant rubbing of hands. He ascends. He reaches the landing. Beneath the door, a faint light filters through, as in 6'4". Is it a delusion? In the dimness, he recognizes his room. The yellow sofa. On the right, the old chest of pearlwood. On the left, the brass-bound strong-box in which he intended to deposit his 120 fretzers. There, in his armchair with the leather cushions, there is his table with its twisted legs, and on it, close to the expiring lamp, his pharmacopoeia open at page 197. "What is the matter with me?" he murmurs. What is the matter with him? Fear. His pupils are dilated, his body is contracted, shriveled. An icy perspiration freezes his skin. Every hair stands on end. But hasten, for want of oil the lamp expires. And also the dying man. Yes, there is the bed. His own bed, with posts and canopy, as wide as it is long, shut in by heavy curtains. Is it possible that this is the pallet of a wretched herring salter? With a quaking hand, Dr. Trafalgus seizes the curtains. He opens them. He looks in. The dying man, his head uncovered, is motionless, as if at his last breath. The doctor leans over him. Ah, what a cry! To which outside responds an unearthly howl from the dog. The dying man is not the herring salter, Fort Cartiff. It is Dr. Trafalgus. It is he whom congestion has attacked. He himself. Cerebral apoplexy, with sudden accumulation of serosity in the cavities of the brain, with paralysis of the body on the side opposite that of the seat of the lesion. Yes, it is he who was sent for, and for whom 120 fretzers have been paid. He who, from the hardness of heart, refuses to attend the herring salter. He who is dying. Dr. Trafalgus is like a madman. He knows himself lost. At each moment the symptoms increase. Not only all the functions of the organs slacken, but the lungs and the heart cease to act. And yet he has not quite lost consciousness. What can be done? Bleed. If he hesitates, Dr. Trafalgus is dead. In those days they still bled, and then, as now, medical men cured all those apoplectic patients who were not going to die. Dr. Trafalgus seizes his case, takes out his lancet, opens a vein in the arm of his double. The blood does not flow. He rubs his chest violently. His own breathing grows slower. He warms his feet with hot bricks. His own grow cold. Then his double lifts himself, falls back, and draws one last breath. Dr. Trafalgus, notwithstanding all that his science has taught him to do, dies beneath his own hands. 7. In the morning a corpse was found in the house 6'4", that of Dr. Trafalgus. They put him in a coffin and carried him with much pomp to the cemetery of Lovecraft, whither he had sent so many others, in a professional manner. As to old Herzog, it is said that to this day he haunts the country with his lantern alight, and howling like a lost dog. I do not know if that be true, but strange things happen in Bolsinia, especially in the neighborhood of Lovecraft. And again, I warn you not to hunt for that town on the map. The best geographers have not yet agreed as to its latitude. nor even as to its longitude.
A modest proposal. For preventing the children of poor people in Ireland from being a burden on their parents or country, and for making them beneficial to the public, by Dr. Jonathan Swift, 1729. It is a melancholy object to those who walk through this great town or travel in the country when they see the streets, the roads, and cabin doors crowded with beggars of the female sex, followed by 3, 4, or 6 children, all in rags, and importuning every passenger for an alms. These mothers, instead of being able to work for their honest livelihood, are forced to employ all their time in strolling to beg sustenance for their helpless infants, who, as they grow up, either turn thieves for want of work or leave their dear native country to fight for the Pretender in Spain, or sell themselves to the Barbados. I think it is agreed by all parties that this prodigious number of children in the arms, or on the backs, or at the heels of their mothers, and frequently of their fathers, is in the present deplorable state of the kingdom a very great additional grievance, and therefore whoever could find out a fair, cheap and easy method of making these children sound and useful members of the Commonwealth would deserve so well of the public as to have his statue set up for a preserver of the nation. But my intention is very far from being confined to provide only for the children of professed beggars. It is of a much greater extent, and shall take in the whole number of infants at a certain age, who are born of parents, in effect, as little able to support them, as those who demand our charity in the streets. As to my own part, having turned my thoughts for many years upon this important subject, and maturely weighed the several schemes of our projectors, I have always found them grossly mistaken in their computation. It is true, a child just dropped from its dam may be supported by her milk for a solar year, with little other nourishment, at most not above the value of 2 shillings, which the mother may certainly get, or the value in scraps, by her lawful occupation of begging. And it is exactly at 1 year old that I propose to provide for them in such a manner as, instead of being a charge upon their parents or the parish, or wanting food and raiment for the rest of their lives, they shall, on the contrary, contribute to the feeding and partly to the clothing of many thousands. There is likewise another great advantage in my scheme, that it will prevent those voluntary abortions, and that horrid practice of women murdering their bastard children, alas, too frequent among us, sacrificing the poor innocent babes, I doubt, more to avoid the expense than the shame, which would move tears and pity in the most savage and inhuman breast. The number of souls in this kingdom being usually reckoned 1.5 million, of these I calculate there may be about 200,000 couple whose wives are breeders, from which number I subtract 30,000 couple who are able to maintain their own children, although I apprehend there cannot be so many under the present distresses of the kingdom. But this being granted, there will remain 170,000 breeders. I again subtract 50,000 for those women who miscarry, or whose children die by accident or disease within the year. There only remain 120,000 children of poor parents annually born. The question therefore is, how this number shall be reared and provided for, which, as I have already said, under the present situation of affairs, is utterly impossible by all the methods hitherto proposed. For we can neither employ them in handicraft or agriculture. They neither build houses, I mean in the country, nor cultivate land. They can very seldom pick up a livelihood by stealing till they arrive at 6 years old, except where they are of towardly parts, although I confess they learn the rudiments much earlier, during which time they can however be properly looked upon only as probationers, as I have been informed by a principal gentleman in the county of Cavan, who protested to me that he never knew above 1 or 2 instances under the age of 6, even in a part of the kingdom so renowned for the quickest proficiency in that art. I am assured by our merchants that a boy or a girl before 12 years old is no saleable commodity, and even when they come to this age, they will not yield above 3 pounds, or 3 pounds and half a crown at most, on the exchange, which cannot turn to account either to the parents or kingdom, the charge of nutriments and rags having been at least 4 times that value. I shall now therefore humbly propose my own thoughts, which I hope will not be liable to the least objection. I have been assured by a very knowing American of my acquaintance in London that a young healthy child well nursed is, at a year old, a most delicious, nourishing, and wholesome food, whether stewed, roasted, baked, or boiled, and I make no doubt that it will equally serve in a fricassee or a ragust. I do therefore humbly offer it to public consideration that of the 120,000 children already computed, 20,000 may be reserved for breed, whereof only 1/4 part to be males, which is more than we allow to sheep, black cattle, or swine, and my reason is that these children are seldom the fruits of marriage, a circumstance not much regarded by our savages. Therefore, 1 male will be sufficient to serve 4 females, that the remaining 100,000 may, at a year old, be offered in sale to the persons of quality and fortune through the kingdom, always advising the mother to let them suck plentifully in the last month, so as to render them plump and fat for a good table. A child will make 2 dishes at an entertainment for friends, and when the family dines alone, the fore or hind quarter will make a reasonable dish, and seasoned with a little pepper or salt, will be very good boiled on the 4th day, especially in winter. I have reckoned upon a medium that a child just born will weigh 12 pounds, and in a solar year, if tolerably nursed, increaseth to 28 pounds. I grant this food will be somewhat dear, and therefore very proper for landlords, who, as they have already devoured most of the parents, seem to have the best title to the children. Infant's flesh will be in season throughout the year, but more plentiful in March, and a little before and after, for we are told by a grave author, an eminent French physician, that fish being a prolific diet, there are more children born in Roman Catholic countries about 9 months after Lent than at any other season. Therefore, reckoning a year after Lent, the markets will be more glutted than usual, because the number of popish infants is at least 3 to 1 in this kingdom, and therefore it will have one other collateral advantage, by lessening the number of papists among us. I have already computed the charge of nursing a beggar's child, in which list I reckon all cottagers, laborers, and 4/5 of the farmers, to be about 2 shillings per annum, rags included, and I believe no gentleman would repine to give 10 shillings for the carcass of a good fat child, which, as I have said, will make 4 dishes of excellent nutritive meat, when he hath only some particular friend or his own family to dine with him. Thus the squire will learn to be a good landlord, and grow popular among his tenants, the mother will have 8 shillings neat profit, and be fit for work till she produces another child. Those who are more thrifty, as I must confess the times require, may flay the carcass, the skin of which, artificially dressed, will make admirable gloves for ladies and summer boots for fine gentlemen. As to our city of Dublin, shambles may be appointed for this purpose in the most convenient parts of it, and butchers, we may be assured, will not be wanting. Although I rather recommend buying the children alive and dressing them hot from the knife, as we do roasting pigs. A very worthy person, a true lover of his country, and whose virtues I highly esteem, was lately pleased, in discoursing on this matter, to offer a refinement upon my scheme. He said that many gentlemen of this kingdom, having of late destroyed their deer, he conceived that the want of venison might be well supplied by the bodies of young lads and maidens, not exceeding 14 years of age, nor under 12, so great a number of both sexes in every county being now ready to starve for want of work and service, and these to be disposed of by their parents if alive, or otherwise by their nearest relations. But with due deference to so excellent a friend, and so deserving a patriot, I cannot be altogether in his sentiments. For as to the males, my American acquaintance assured me from frequent experience that their flesh was generally tough and lean, like that of our schoolboys, by continual exercise, and their taste disagreeable, and to fatten them would not answer the charge. Then as to the females, it would, I think, with humble submission, be a loss to the public, because they soon would become breeders themselves. And besides, it is not improbable that some scrupulous people might be apt to censure such a practice, although indeed very unjustly, as a little bordering upon cruelty, which I confess hath always been with me the strongest objection against any project, how well soever intended. But in order to justify my friend, he confessed that this expedient was put into his head by the famous Salmanazar, a native of the island Formosa, who came from thence to London above 20 years ago, and in conversation told my friend that in his country, when any young person happened to be put to death, the executioner sold the carcass to persons of quality as a prime dainty, and that in his time the body of a plump girl of 15 who was crucified for an attempt to poison the emperor was sold to his imperial majesty's prime minister of state, and other great mandarins of the court in joints from the gibbet, at 400 crowns. Neither indeed can I deny that if the same use were made of several plump young girls in this town, who without one single groat to their fortunes cannot stir abroad without a chair, and appear at a playhouse and assemblies and foreign fineries, which they never will pay for, the kingdom would not be the worse. Some persons of a desponding spirit are in great concern about that vast number of poor people who are aged, diseased, or maimed, and I have been desired to employ my thoughts what course may be taken to ease the nation of so grievous an encumbrance. But I am not in the least pain upon that matter, because it is very well known that they are every day dying and rotting by cold and famine, and filth and vermin, as fast as can be reasonably expected. And as to the young laborers, they are now in almost as hopeful a condition. They cannot get work, and consequently pine away from want of nourishment to a degree that if at any time they are accidentally hired to common labor, they have not strength to to perform it, and thus the country and themselves are happily delivered from the evils to come. I have too long digressed, and therefore shall return to my subject. I think the advantages by the proposal which I have made are obvious and many, as well as of the highest importance. For first, as I have already observed, it would greatly lessen the number of papists, with whom we are yearly overrun, being the principal breeders of the nation, as well as our most dangerous enemies, and who stay at home on purpose with a design to deliver the kingdom to the pretender, hoping to take their advantage by the absence of so many good Protestants, who have chosen rather to leave their country than stay at home and pay tithes against their conscience to an episcopal curate. Secondly, the poorer tenants will have something valuable of their own, which by law may be made liable to distress and help to pay their landlord's rent, their corn and cattle being already seized and money a thing unknown. Thirdly, whereas the maintenance of 100,000 children from 2 years old and upwards cannot be computed at less than 10 shillings apiece per annum, the nation's stock will be thereby increased 50,000 pounds per annum, besides the profit of a new dish, introduced to the tables of all gentlemen of fortune in the kingdom, who have any refinement in taste. And the money will circulate among ourselves, the goods being entirely of our own growth and manufacture. Fourthly, the constant breeders, besides the gain of 8 shillings sterling per annum by the sale of their children, will be rid of the charge of maintaining them after the first year. Fifthly, this food would likewise bring great custom to taverns, where the vintners will certainly be so prudent as to procure the best receipts for dressing it to perfection, and consequently have their houses frequented by all the fine gentlemen, who justly value themselves upon their knowledge in good eating, and a skillful cook who understands how to oblige his guests will contrive to make it as expensive as they please. Sixthly, this would be a great inducement to marriage, which all wise nations have either encouraged by rewards or enforced by laws and penalties. It would increase the care and tenderness of mothers towards their children when they were sure of a settlement for life to the poor babes, provided in some sort by the public to their annual profit instead of expense. We should soon see an honest emulation among the married women, which of them could bring the fattest child to the market. Men would become as fond of their wives during the time of their pregnancy as they are now of their mares and foal, their cows and calf, or sows when they are ready to farrow, nor offer to beat or kick them, as is too frequent a practice for fear of a miscarriage. Many other advantages might be enumerated. For instance, the addition of some thousand carcasses in our exportation of barreled beef, the propagation of swine's flesh, and improvement in the art of making good bacon, so much wanted among us by the great destruction of pigs, too frequent at our tables, which are no way comparable in taste or magnificence to a well-grown, fat yearling child, which roasted whole will make a considerable figure at a Lord Mayor's feast, or any other public entertainment. But this, and many others, I omit, being studious of brevity. Supposing that 1,000 families in this city would be constant customers for infants' flesh, besides others who might have it at merry meetings, particularly at weddings and christenings, I compute that Dublin would take off annually about 20,000 carcasses, and the rest of the kingdom, where probably they will be sold somewhat cheaper, the remaining 80,000. I can think of no one objection that will possibly be raised against this proposal, unless it should be urged that the number of people will be thereby much lessened in the kingdom. This I freely own, and was indeed one principal design in offering it to the world. I desire the reader will observe that I calculate my remedy for this one individual kingdom of Ireland, and for no other that ever was, is, or I think ever can be upon earth. Therefore let no man talk to me of other expedients, of taxing our absentees at 5 shillings a pound, of using neither clothes nor household furniture except what is of our own growth and manufacture, of utterly rejecting the materials and instruments that promote foreign luxury, of curing the expensiveness of pride, vanity, idleness, and gaming in our women, of introducing a vein of parsimony, prudence, and temperance, of learning to love our country, wherein we differ even from Laplanders and the inhabitants of Toponamba, of quitting our animosities and factions, nor acting any longer like the Jews, who were murdering one another at the very moment their city was taken, of being a little cautious not to sell our country and consciences for nothing, of teaching landlords to have at least one degree of mercy towards their tenants. Lastly, of putting a spirit of honesty, industry, and skill into our shopkeepers, who, if a resolution could now be taken to buy only our native goods, would immediately unite to cheat and exact upon us in the price, the measure, and the goodness, nor could ever yet be brought to make one fair proposal of just dealing, though often and earnestly invited to it. Therefore, I repeat, let no man talk to me of these and the like expedients, till he hath at least some glimpse of hope that there will ever be some hearty and sincere attempt to put them into practice. But as to myself, having been wearied out for many years with offering vain, idle, visionary thoughts, and at length utterly despairing of success, I fortunately fell upon this proposal, which, as it is wholly new, so it hath something solid and real, of no expense and little trouble, full in our own power, and whereby we can incur no danger in disobliging England. For this kind of commodity will not bear exportation, and flesh being of too tender a consistence to admit a long continuance in salt, although perhaps I could name a country which would be glad to eat up our whole nation without it. After all, I am not so violently bent upon my own opinion as to reject any offer proposed by wise men, which shall be found equally innocent, cheap, easy, and effectual. But before something of that kind shall be advanced in contradiction to my scheme, and offering a better, I desire the author or authors will be pleased maturely to consider 2 points. First, as things now stand, how they will be able to find food and raiment for 100,000 useless mouths and backs. And secondly, there being a round million of creatures in humane figure throughout this kingdom, whose whole subsistence put into a common stock would leave them in debt 2,000,000 of pounds sterling, adding those who are beggars by profession, to the bulk of farmers, cottagers, and laborers, with their wives and children, who are beggars in effect. I desire those politicians who dislike my overture, and may perhaps be so bold to attempt an answer, that they will first ask the parents of these mortals, whether they would not at this day think it a great happiness to have been sold for food at a year old, in the manner I prescribe, and thereby have avoided such a perpetual scene of misfortunes as they have since gone through by the oppression of landlords, the impossibility of paying rent without money or trade, the want of common sustenance, with neither house nor clothes to cover them from the inclemencies of the weather, and the most inevitable prospect of entailing the like or greater miseries upon their breed forever. I profess in the sincerity of my heart that I have not the least personal interest in endeavoring to promote this necessary work, having no other motive than the public good of my country by advancing our trade, providing for infants, relieving the poor, and giving some pleasure to the rich. I have no children by which I can propose to get a single penny, the youngest being 9 years old, and my wife past childbearing.
This is a memorable anniversary for me. On it, I complete my 323rd year. The Wandering Jew? Certainly not. More than 18 centuries have passed over his head. In comparison with him, I am a very young immortal. Am I, then, immortal? This question, which I have asked myself by day and night for now 303 years, and yet cannot answer it. I detected a grey hair amidst my brown locks this very day. That surely signifies decay. Yet it may have remained concealed there for 300 years. Some persons have become entirely white-headed before 20 years of age. I will tell my story, and my reader shall judge for me. I will tell my story, and so contrive to pass some few hours of a long eternity become so wearisome to me. Forever, can it be, to live forever? I have heard of enchantments, in which the victims were plunged into a deep sleep to wake after 100 years as fresh as ever. I have heard of the 7 sleepers. Thus to be immortal would not be so burthensome. But oh, the weight of never-ending time, the tedious passage of the still succeeding hours. How happy was the fabled Noor Jahad, but to my task. All the world has heard of Cornelius Agrippa. His memory is as immortal as his arts have made me. All the world has also heard of his scholar, who, unawares, raised the foul fiend during his master's absence, and was destroyed by him. The report, true or false, of this accident was attended with many inconveniences to the renowned philosopher. All his scholars at once deserted him. His servants disappeared. He had no one near him to put coals on his ever-burning fires while he slept, or to attend to the changeful colours of his medicines while he studied. Experiment after experiment failed, because one pair of hands was insufficient to complete them. The dark spirits laughed at him for not being able to retain a single mortal in his service. I was then very young, very poor, and very much in love. I had been for about a year the pupil of Cornelius, though I was absent when this accident took place. On my return, my friends implored me not to return to the alchemist's abode. I trembled as I listened to the dire tale they told. I required no second warning, and when Cornelius came and offered me a purse of gold if I would remain under his roof, I felt as if Satan himself tempted me. My teeth chattered, my hair stood on end. I ran off as fast as my trembling knees would permit. My failing steps were directed whither for 2 years they had every evening been attracted, a gently bubbling spring of pure living water, beside which lingered a dark-haired girl whose beaming eyes were fixed on the path I was accustomed each night to tread. I cannot remember the hour when I did not love Bertha. We had been neighbours and playmates from infancy. Her parents, like mine, were of humble life, yet respectable. Our attachment had been a source of pleasure to them. In an evil hour, a malignant fever carried off both her father and mother, and Bertha became an orphan. She would have found a home beneath my paternal roof, but, unfortunately, the old lady of the near castle, rich, childless, and solitary, declared her intention to adopt her. Henceforth, Bertha was clad in silk, inhabited a marble palace, and was looked on as being highly favoured by fortune. But in her new situation, among her new associates, Bertha remained true to the friend of her humbler days. She often visited the cottage of my father, and when forbidden to go thither, she would stray towards the neighbouring wood, and meet me beside its shady fountain. She often declared that she owed no duty to her new protectress equal in sanctity to that which bound us. Yet still I was too poor to marry, and she grew weary of being tormented on my account. She had a haughty but impatient spirit, and grew angry at the obstacles that prevented our union. We met now after an absence, and she had been sorely beset while I was away. She complained bitterly, and almost reproached me for being poor. I replied hastily, "I am honest if I am poor. Were I not, I might soon become rich." This exclamation produced 1,000 questions. I feared to shock her by owning the truth, but she drew it from me, and then, casting a look of disdain on me, she said, "You pretend to love, and you fear to face the devil for my sake." I protested that I had only dreaded to offend her, while she dwelt on the magnitude of the reward that I should receive. Thus encouraged, shamed by her, led on by love and hope, laughing at my late fears with quick steps and light heart, I returned to accept the offers of the alchemist, and was instantly installed in my office. A year passed away. I became possessed of no insignificant sum of money. Custom had banished my fears. In spite of the most painful vigilance, I had never detected the trace of a cloven foot, nor was the studious silence of our abode ever disturbed by demonic howls. I still continued my stolen interviews with Bertha, and hope dawned on me, hope, but not perfect joy. For Bertha fancied that love and security were enemies, and her pleasure was to divide them in my bosom. Though true of heart, she was somewhat of a coquette in manner, and I was jealous as a Turk. She slighted me in 1,000 ways, yet would never acknowledge herself to be in the wrong. She would drive me mad with anger, and then force me to beg her pardon. Sometimes she fancied that I was not sufficiently submissive, and then she had some story of a rival, favoured by her protectress. She was surrounded by silk-clad youths, the rich and gay. What chance had the sad-robed scholar of Cornelius compared with these? On one occasion, the philosopher made such large demands upon my time that I was unable to meet her as I was wont. He was engaged in some mighty work, and I was forced to remain day and night, feeding his furnaces and watching his chemical preparations. Bertha waited for me in vain at the fountain. Her haughty spirit fired at this neglect, and when at last I stole out during the few short minutes allotted to me for slumber, and hoped to be consoled by her, she received me with disdain, dismissed me in scorn, and vowed that any man should possess her hand rather than he who could not be in 2 places at once for her sake. She would be revenged, and truly she was. In my dingy retreat I heard that she had been hunting, attended by Albert Hoffer. Albert Hoffer was favoured by her protectress, and the 3 passed in a cavalcade before my smoky window. Methought that they mentioned my name. It was followed by a laugh of derision as her dark eyes glanced contemptuously towards my abode. Jealousy with all its venom and misery entered my breast. Now I shed a torrent of tears. To think that I should never call her mine, and anon I imprecated 1,000 curses on her inconstancy. Yet still I must stir the fires of the alchemist, still attend on the changes of his unintelligible medicines. Cornelius had watched for 3 days and nights, nor closed his eyes. The progress of his alembics was slower than he expected. In spite of his anxiety, sleep weighed upon his eyelids. Again and again he threw off drowsiness with more than human energy. Again and again it stole away his senses. He eyed his crucibles wistfully. "Not ready yet," he murmured. "Will another night pass before the work is accomplished? Windsy, you are vigilant, you are faithful. You have slept, my boy, you slept last night. Look at that glass vessel. The liquid it contains is of a soft rosé colour. The moment it begins to change its hue, awaken me. Till then I may close my eyes. First it will turn white, and then emit golden flashes. But wait not till then. When the rosé colour fades, rouse me." I scarcely heard the last words, muttered as they were, in sleep. Even then he did not quite yield to nature. "Windsy, my boy," he again said, "do not touch the vessel. Do not put it to your lips. It is a filter, a filter to cure love. You would not cease to love your Bertha. Beware to drink. And he slept. His venerable head sunk on his breast, and I scarce heard his regular breathing. For a few minutes I watched the vessel. The rosy hue of the liquid remained unchanged. Then my thoughts wandered. They visited the fountain, and dwelt on 1,000 charming scenes never to be renewed. Never. Serpents and adders were in my heart, as the word never half formed itself on my lips. False girl, false and cruel, never more would she smile on me as that evening she smiled on Albert. Worthless, detested woman, I would not remain unrevenged. She would see Albert expire at her feet. She would die beneath my vengeance. She had smiled in disdain and triumph. She knew my wretchedness and her power. Yet what power had she? The power of exciting my hate, my utter scorn, my, all but indifference. Could I attain that? Could I regard her with careless eyes, transferring my rejected love to one fairer and more true? That were indeed a victory. A bright flash darted before my eyes. I had forgotten the medicine of the adept. I gazed on it with wonder. Flashes of admirable beauty, more bright than those which the diamond emits when the sun's rays are on it, glanced from the surface of the liquid. An odour the most fragrant and grateful stole over my sense. The vessel seemed one globe of living radiance, lovely to the eye, and most inviting to the taste. The first thought, instinctively inspired by the grosser sense, was, I must drink. I raised the vessel to my lips. It will cure me of love, of torture. Already I had quaffed half of the most delicious liqueur ever tasted by the palate of a man. When the philosopher stirred, I started. I dropped the glass. The fluid flamed and glanced along the floor, while I felt Cornelius gripe at my throat as he shrieked aloud, "Wretch, you have destroyed the labour of my life." The philosopher was totally unaware that I had drunk any portion of his drug. His idea was, and I gave tacit assent to it, that I had raised the vessel from curiosity, and that, frightened at its brightness and the flashes of intense light it gave forth, I had let it fall. I never undeceived him. The fire of the medicine was quenched. The fragrance died away. He grew calm, as a philosopher should under the heaviest trials, and dismissed me to rest. I will not attempt to describe the sleep of glory and bliss which bathed my soul in paradise during the remaining hours of that memorable night. Words would be faint and shallow types of my enjoyment, or of the gladness that possessed my bosom when I awoke. I trod air, my thoughts were in heaven. Earth appeared heaven, and my inheritance upon it was to be one trance of delight. This it is to be cured of love, I thought. I will see Bertha this day, and she will find her lover cold and regardless, too happy to be disdainful, yet how utterly indifferent to her. The hours danced away. The philosopher, secure that he had once succeeded, and believing that he might again, began to concoct the same medicine once more. He was shut up with his books and drugs, and I had a holiday. I dressed myself with care. I looked in an old but polished shield, which served me for a mirror. Methought my good looks had wonderfully improved. I hurried beyond the precincts of the town, joy in my soul, the beauty of heaven and earth around me. I turned my steps towards the castle. I could look on its lofty turrets with a lightness of heart, for I was cured of love. My Bertha saw me afar off as I came up the avenue. I know not what sudden impulse animated her bosom, but at the sight she sprung with a light fawn-like bound down the marble steps, and was hastening towards me. But I had been perceived by another person, the old high-born hag who called herself her protectress, and was her tyrant, had seen me also. She hobbled, panting, up the terrace. A page, as ugly as herself, held up her train, and fanned her as she hurried along, and stopped my fair girl with a How now, my bold mistress, whither so fast? Back to your cage, hawks are abroad. Bertha clasped her hands. Her eyes were still bent on my approaching figure. I saw the contest. How I abhorred the old crone who checked the kind impulses of my Bertha's softening heart. Hitherto respect for her rank had caused me to avoid the lady of the castle. Now I disdained such trivial considerations. I was cured of love, and lifted above all human fears. I hastened forwards, and soon reached the terrace. How lovely Bertha looked! Her eyes flashing fire, her cheeks glowing with impatience and anger. She was 1,000 times more graceful and charming than ever. I no longer loved. Oh no, I adored, worshipped, idolized her. She had that morning been persecuted with more than usual vehemence to consent to an immediate marriage with my rival. She was reproached with the encouragement that she had shown him. She was threatened with being turned out of doors with disgrace and shame. Her proud spirit rose in arms at that threat, but when she remembered the scorn that she had heaped upon me, and how, perhaps, she had thus lost one whom she now regarded as her only friend, she wept with remorse and rage. At that moment I appeared. "Oh, Winsey," she exclaimed, "take me to your mother's cot. Swiftly let me leave the detested luxuries and wretchedness of this noble dwelling. Take me to poverty and happiness." I clasped her in my arms with transport. The old dame was speechless with fury, and broke forth into invective only when we were far on our road to my natal cottage. My mother received the fair fugitive, escaped from a gilt cage to nature and liberty, with tenderness and joy. My father, who loved her, welcomed her heartily. It was a day of rejoicing, which did not need the addition of the celestial portion of the alchemist to steep me in delight. Soon after this eventful day, I became the husband of Bertha. I ceased to be the scholar of Cornelius, but I continued his friend. I always felt grateful to him for having, unawares, procured me that delicious draught of divine elixir, which, instead of curing me of love, sad cure, solitary and joyless remedy for evils which seemed blessings to the memory, had inspired me with courage and resolution, thus winning for me an inestimable treasure in my Bertha. I often called to mind that period of trance-like inebriation with wonder. The drink of Cornelius had not fulfilled the task for which he affirmed that it had been prepared, but its effects were more potent and blissful than words can express. They had faded by degrees, yet they lingered long, and painted life in hues of splendour. Bertha often wondered at my lightness of heart and unaccustomed gaiety, for before I had been rather serious, or even sad, in my disposition. She loved me the better for my cheerful temper, and our days were winged by joy. 5 years afterwards, I was suddenly summoned to the bedside of the dying Cornelius. He had sent for me in haste, conjuring my instant presence. I found him stretched on his pallet, enfeebled even to death. All of life that yet remained animated his piercing eyes, and they were fixed on a glassed vessel, full of a roseate liquid. "Behold," he said, in a broken and inward voice, "the vanity of human wishes. A second time my hopes are about to be crowned. A second time they are destroyed. Look at that liqueur. You remember 5 years ago I had prepared the same, with the same success. Then as now, my thirsting lips expected to taste the immortal elixir. You dashed it from me, and at present it is too late." He spoke with difficulty and fell back on his pillow. I could not help saying, "How, revered master, can a cure for love restore you to life?" A faint smile gleamed across his face as I listened earnestly to his scarcely intelligible answer. "A cure for love and for all things, the elixir of immortality. Ah, if now I might drink, I should live forever." As he spoke, A golden flash gleamed from the fluid. A well-remembered fragrance stole over the air. He raised himself, all weak as he was. Strength seemed miraculously to re-enter his frame. He stretched forth his hand. A loud explosion startled me. A ray of fire shot up from the elixir, and the glass vessel which contained it was shivered to atoms. I turned my eyes toward the philosopher. He had fallen back. His eyes were glassy, his features rigid. He was dead. But I lived, and was to live forever. So said the unfortunate alchemist, and for a few days I believed his words. I remembered the glorious intoxication that had followed my stolen draught. I reflected on the change I had felt in my frame, in my soul. The bounding elasticity of the one, the buoyant lightness of the other. I surveyed myself in a mirror, and could perceive no change in my features during the space of the 5 years which had elapsed. I remembered the radiant hues and grateful scent of that delicious beverage, worthy the gift it was capable of bestowing. I was, then, immortal. A few days after I laughed at my credulity. The old proverb that a prophet is least regarded in his own country was true with respect to me and my defunct master. I loved him as a man, I respected him as a sage, but I derided the notion that he could command the powers of darkness, and laughed at the superstitious fears with which he was regarded by the vulgar. He was a wise philosopher, but had no acquaintance with any spirits but those clad in flesh and blood. His science was simply human, and human science, I soon persuaded myself, could never conquer nature's laws so far as to imprison the soul forever within its carnal habitation. Cornelius had brewed a soul-refreshing drink, more inebriating than wine, sweeter and more fragrant than any fruit. It possessed probably strong medicinal powers, imparting gladness to the heart and vigor to the limbs, but its effects would wear out. Already they were diminishing in my frame. I was a lucky fellow to have quaffed health and joyous spirits, and perhaps long life, at my master's hands. But my good fortune ended there. Longevity was far different from immortality. I continued to entertain this belief for many years. Sometimes a thought stole across me, was the alchemist indeed deceived? But my habitual credence was that I should meet the fate of all children of Adam at my appointed time, a little late, but still at a natural age. Yet it was certain that I retained a wonderfully youthful look. I was laughed at for my vanity in consulting the mirror so often, but I consulted it in vain. My brow was untrenched, my cheeks, my eyes, my whole person continued as untarnished as in my 20th year. I was troubled. I looked at the faded beauty of Bertha. I seemed more like her son. By degrees our neighbours began to make similar observations, and I found at last that I went by the name of the scholar bewitched. Bertha herself grew uneasy. She became jealous and peevish, and at length she began to question me. We had no children. We were all in all to each other, and though, as she grew older, her vivacious spirit became a little allied to ill temper, and her beauty sadly diminished, I cherished her in my heart as the mistress I had idolized, the wife I had sought and won with such perfect love. At last our situation became intolerable. Bertha was 50, I 20 years of age. I had, in very shame, in some measure adopted the habits of a more advanced age. I no longer mingled in the dance among the young and gay, but my heart bounded along with them while I restrained my feet. And a sorry figure I cut among the nesters of our village. But before the time I mention, things were altered. We were universally shunned. We were, at least I was, reported to have kept up an inquietus acquaintance with some of my former master's supposed friends. Poor Bertha was pitied, but deserted. I was regarded with horror and detestation. But what was to be done? We sat by our winter fire. Poverty had made itself felt, for none would buy the produce of my farm. and often I had been forced to journey 20 miles to some place where I was not known to dispose of our property. It is true, we had saved something for an evil day. That day was come. We sat by our lone fireside, the old-hearted youth and his antiquated wife. Again, Bertha insisted on knowing the truth. She recapitulated all that she had ever heard said about me, and added her own observations. She conjured me to cast off the spell. She described how much more comely grey hairs were than my chestnut locks. She descanted on the reverence and respect due to age, how preferable to the slight regard paid to mere children. Could I imagine that the despicable gifts of youth and good looks outweighed disgrace, hatred, and scorn? Nay, in the end, I should be burnt as the dealer in the black art, while she, to whom I had not deigned to communicate any portion of my good fortune, might be stoned as my accomplice. At length she insinuated that I must share my secret with her, and bestow on her like benefits to those I myself enjoyed, or she would denounce me, and then she burst into tears. Thus beset, methought it was the best way to tell the truth. I revealed it as tenderly as I could, and spoke only of a very long life, not of immortality, which representation, indeed, coincided best with my own ideas. When I ended, I rose and said, "And now, my Bertha, will you denounce the lover of your youth? You will not, I know. But it is too hard, my poor wife, that you should suffer from my ill luck and the accursed arts of Cornelius. I will leave you. You have wealth enough, and friends will return in my absence. I will go, young as I seem and strong as I am. I can work and gain my bread among strangers, unsuspected and unknown. I loved you in youth. God is my witness that I would not desert you in age, but that your safety and happiness require it." I took my cap and moved towards the door. In a moment Bertha's arms were round my neck, and her lips were pressed to mine. "No, my husband, my Winsey," she said. "You shall not go alone. Take me with you. We will remove from this place, and as you say, among strangers, we shall be unsuspected and safe. I am not so very old as quite to shame you, my Winsey, and I dare say the charm will soon wear off, and with the blessing of God you will become more elderly looking, as is fitting. You shall not leave me." I returned the good soul's embrace heartily. "I will not, my Bertha, but for your sake I had not thought of such a thing. I will be your true, faithful husband while you are spared to me, and do my duty by you to the last." The next day we prepared secretly for our emigration. We were obliged to make great pecuniary sacrifices. It could not be helped. We realized a sum sufficient, at least, to maintain us while Bertha lived, and without saying adieu to anyone, quitted our native country to take refuge in a remote part of western France. It was a cruel thing to transport poor Bertha from her native village, and the friends of her youth, to a new country, new language, new customs. The strange secret of my destiny rendered this removal immaterial to me, but I compassioned her deeply, and was glad to perceive that she found compensation for her misfortunes in a variety of little ridiculous circumstances. Away from all telltale chroniclers, she sought to decrease the apparent disparity of our ages by 1,000 feminine arts, rouge, youthful dress, and assumed juvenility of manner. I could not be angry. Did not I myself wear a mask? Why quarrel with hers because it was less successful? I grieved deeply when I remembered that this was my Bertha, whom I had loved so fondly, and won with such transport, the dark-eyed, dark-haired girl, with smiles of enchanting archness, and a step like a fawn, this mincing, simpering, jealous old woman. I should have revered her grey locks and withered cheeks, but thus. It was my work, I knew, but I did not the less deplore this type of human weakness. Her jealousy never slept. Her chief occupation was to discover that, in spite of outward appearance, I was myself growing old. I verily believe that the poor soul loved me, truly, in her heart, but never had woman so tormenting a mode of displaying fondness. She would discern wrinkles in my face and decrepitude in my walk, while I bounded along in youthful vigour, the youngest looking of 20 youths. I never dared address another woman, on one occasion fancying that the belle of the village regarded me with favouring eyes. She brought me a grey wig. Her constant discourse among her acquaintances was, that though I looked so young, there was ruin at work within my frame. She affirmed that the worst symptom about it was my apparent health. My youth was a disease, she said, and I ought at all times to prepare, if not for a sudden and awful death, at least to awake some morning white-headed and bowed down with all the marks of advanced years. I let her talk. I often joined in her conjectures. Her warnings chimed in with my never-ceasing speculations concerning my state, and I took an earnest, though painful interest in listening to all that her quick wit and excited imagination could say on the subject. Why dwell on these minute circumstances? We lived on for many long years. Bertha became bedridden and paralytic. I nursed her as a mother might a child. She grew peevish, and still harped upon one string of how long I should survive her. It has ever been a source of consolation to me that I performed my duty scrupulously towards her. She had been mine in youth, she was mine in age, and at the last, when I heaped the sod over her corpse, I wept and fell and had lost all that really bound me to humanity. Since then, how many have been my cares and woes, how few and empty my enjoyments. I pause here in my history. I will pursue it no further. A sailor without rudder or compass tossed to a stormy sea, a traveller lost on a widespread heath, without landmark or stone to guide him. Such have I been, more lost, more hopeless than either. A nearing ship, a gleam from some far cot may save them, but I have no beacon except the hope of death. Death, mysterious, ill-visaged friend of weak humanity, why alone of all mortals have you cast me from your sheltering fold? Oh, for the peace of the grave, the deep silence of the iron-bound tomb. That thought would cease to work in my brain, and my heart beat no more with emotions varied only by new forms of sadness. Am I immortal? I return to my first question. In the first place, is it not more probable that the beverage of the alchemist was fraught rather with longevity than eternal life? Such is my hope. And then it be remembered that I only drank half of the portion prepared by him. Was not the whole necessary to complete the charm? To have drained the half of the elixir of immortality is to be but half immortal. My forever is thus truncated and null. But again, who shall number the years of half of eternity? I often try to imagine by what rule the infinite may be divided. Sometimes I fancy age advancing upon me. One grey hair I have found. Fool. Do I lament? Yes. The fear of age and death often creeps coldly into my heart. The more I live, the more I dread death, even while I abhor life. Such an enigma is man, born to perish when he wars, as do I, against the established laws of his nature. But for this anomaly of feeling surely I might die, the medicine of the alchemist would not be proof against fire, sword, and strangling waters. I have gazed upon the blue depths of many a placid lake, and the tumultuous rushing of many a mighty river, and I have said, peace inhabits those waters. Yet I have turned my steps away, to live yet another day. I have asked myself whether suicide would be a crime in one to whom thus only the portals of the other world could be opened. I have done all, except presenting myself as a soldier or duelist, an object of destruction to not my fellow mortals, and therefore I have shrunk away. They are not my fellows. The inextinguishable power of life in my frame and their ephemeral existence places us wide as the poles asunder. I could not raise a hand against the meanest or most powerful among them. Thus I have lived on for many a year, alone and weary of myself, desirous of death yet never dying, immortal. Neither ambition nor avarice can enter my mind, and the ardent love that gnaws at my heart, never to be returned, never to find an equal on which to expand itself, lives there only to torment me. This very day I conceived a design by which I may end all, without self-slaughter, without making another man a Cain. An expedition which mortal frame can never survive, even endued with the youth and strength that inhabits mine. Thus I shall put my immortality to the test, and rest forever, or return the wonder and benefactor of the human species. Before I go, a miserable vanity has caused me to pen these pages. I would not die and leave no name behind. 3 centuries have passed since I quaffed that fatal beverage. Another year shall not elapse before, encountering gigantic dangers, warring with the powers of frost in their home, beset by famine, toil, and tempest, I yield this body too tenacious a cage for a soul which thirsts for freedom, to the destructive elements of air and water. Or, if I survive, my name shall be recorded as one of the most famous among the sons of men. And my task achieved, I shall adopt more resolute means, and by scattering and annihilating the atoms that compose my frame, set at liberty the life imprisoned within, and so cruelly prevented from soaring from this dim earth to a sphere more congenial to its immortal essence.